Tehran was desperately attempting to conceal a massive subterranean secret. Entombed beneath colossal mounds of earth and reinforced concrete, this high-value target was supposed to remain completely hidden from the world's gaze. But American intelligence found it, and once the coordinates were locked, the United States unleashed its most devastating bunker-busting ordnance. Fortified concrete was literally turned to butter. Absolutely nothing survived the blast radius. Once again, American B-2 stealth bombers have completely shredded Iran's defensive networks as if they did not even exist. Make sure you are subscribed to Titan Mechanics and hit that bell icon so you never miss a critical military intel update. Now, let's look at the battle damage assessment. How do we verify this level of destruction? 3 massive craters. That is precisely what satellite imagery captured over Iran's Taleghan 2 facility, as released by Vantor. But these are not just random impact zones. As the war zone points out, these colossal voids represent a trio of precise impact points that definitively point to the deployment of America's largest, most devastating bunker-busting munitions against a heavily fortified site with undeniable ties to Iran's nuclear weapons program. We will detail the exact ordnance the US deployed in a moment, but the visual evidence provides the clearest indication yet that Washington has radically evolved its kinetic strategy to systematically dismantle the most heavily protected sites inside Iran. The 3 craters in question are clearly visible across the roof of the Taleghan 2 complex, situated right above the hardened subterranean structure housing the top-secret operations Tehran desperately wanted kept in the dark. In the lead-up to Operation Epic Fury, Iran had been working feverishly to harden the Taleghan 2 site. That defensive engineering began in October, when Iran International reported that reconstruction had initiated at a facility that Israeli forces had previously compromised. This heavy construction actually commenced prior to the intense 12-day conflict sparked by 2025's Operation Midnight Hammer, though Tehran was forced to halt operations as its nuclear infrastructure was battered by the exact same class of bunker busters the US just dropped on Taleghan 2. An intelligence assessment published by the Institute for Science and International Security noted at the time that while the exact purpose of the new construction could not be fully discerned from imagery alone, the fact that heavy fortification was occurring at a former AMAD planned nuclear weapons development site raised severe red flags regarding the facility's true operational purpose. As for the defensive engineering itself, the objective was simple. Iran desperately needed to shield its black site from the very munitions Washington just used to obliterate it. Initial fortification efforts involved dragging massive covers over previously destroyed structures, laying deep foundations for a subterranean bunker, and erecting a new arch-roofed structure flanked by several smaller support buildings. Fast forward to the present, and TWZ confirms Iran had escalated the hardening process by encasing the entire Taleghan 2 site in thick, reinforced concrete before burying it beneath a massive layer of compacted soil designed specifically to absorb and dampen the kinetic shockwave of incoming ordnance. A clear tactical picture emerges. As the primary subterranean facility was being expanded, the smaller peripheral structures were likely engineered to serve as concealed access points into the bunker complex. Tehran's fatal flaw was that every phase of this engineering was tracked from orbit. It is practically impossible to conceal the construction of a massive subterranean black site when high-resolution military satellites are maintaining a persistent overhead watch. United States and Israeli intelligence knew exactly what coordinates they needed to target from the moment the first shovel hit the dirt. All that was required was selecting the appropriate munition and waiting for the optimal tactical window. Tehran had to know this strike was inevitable. Taleghan 2 had been compromised before. Back in October 2024, the Israeli Air Force launched a precision strike against the complex, inflicting severe structural damage. That same intelligence institute notes that Taleghan 2 was highly likely operationalized to manufacture high-purity PETN plastic explosives, a critical component in the fabrication of shockwave generators. Likely engineered as a core element of the covert Ahmad plan, these explosive distributors were essential for Tehran to successfully miniaturize its nuclear weapon designs. Miniaturized warheads can be delivered via ballistic missiles with far less logistical effort than massive crude devices, strongly suggesting that the specific bunker American forces just busted wide open played a historical and perhaps current role in Iran's nuclear ambitions. It is highly probable the Pentagon possessed actionable intelligence indicating the newly hardened Taleghan 2 was operationalized for that exact same purpose. Regardless, the facility has now been neutralized for a second and likely final final time. Analysis further details the sheer kinetic devastation the US inflicted when it instantly vaporized Iranian concrete and compacted soil. Naturally, overhead imagery only tells part of the story. 3 gaping craters in the earth only reveal the entry points. The true catastrophic damage was inflicted dozens, if not hundreds, of feet below the surface. However, we do know that these 3 impact zones perfectly bracketed the length of a facility suspected of serving as a high explosive diagnostic chamber. Was this for active nuclear weapons testing? While we can only analyze the available data, the craters provide undeniable proof that American bunker busters effortlessly punched through the massive concrete shield Iran mistakenly believed would guarantee the facility's survival. For Tehran, this is a catastrophic failure of defensive engineering. We need your help to push this analysis. If you're finding this intel valuable, drop a like right now and share this video with your squad. Now back to the ordnance capabilities. Having violently breached the primary concrete casing, or the delayed fuse bunker busters would have detonated deep inside the Taleghan 2 subterranean facility itself. Analysts note this assessment is heavily supported by secondary evidence in the satellite imagery, which displays a protective defensive wall positioned outside the facility's northern access point suffering massive structural failure. This specific damage pattern indicates a massive outward blast wave generated by the American ordnance, confirming that those colossal bombs successfully penetrated Taleghan 2's defensive layers and detonated precisely at their programmed depth. Furthermore, an auxiliary building located southeast of the primary complex appears to have sustained partial structural collapse, highly likely the result of the immense concussive overpressure generated by the primary subterranean detonations. What we are looking at is textbook evidence that the United States executed a flawless precision strike. Crucially, this operation had to have been executed by the United States Air Force, not Israel, because the specific munition deployed is exclusively held in the American arsenal, the devastating 30,000-pound Massive Ordnance Penetrator, or MOP. Officially designated the GBU-57B, this absolute behemoth of a bomb is the only viable kinetic candidate capable of gouging the colossal craters visible in the satellite data. Everything observed in the battle damage assessment is consistent with MOP deployment, as the impact signatures perfectly match those generated over the Fordo and Natanz nuclear sites during the height of Operation Midnight Hammer. We know as a matter of historical record that the Pentagon deployed MOPs in those specific strikes, 12 on Fordo and 2 on Natanz, so the above-ground visual signature at Taleghan 2 provides all the confirmation necessary that Washington utilized its heaviest kinetic hammer to obliterate yet another hardened Iranian asset. That is not to imply the Pentagon lacked other heavy ordnance options. The GBU-43B, famously designated the mother of all bombs, or Moab, is another heavyweight candidate, earning its moniker because it stood as the most powerful non-nuclear munition in the US inventory prior to the development of the MOP. This 21,000-pound thermobaric weapon was rapidly engineered in just 9 weeks to support the 2003 invasion of Iraq, typically deployed from the ramp of a C-130 Hercules. The Moab is extracted via a drogue parachute before engaging its grid fins to stabilize and steer the massive weapon toward its target coordinates. It is an undeniable heavy hitter, delivering a massive 18,700-pound warhead packed with a highly volatile mixture of explosives to generate a catastrophic blast wave. However, the Moab was absolutely the wrong tool for the Taleghan 2 objective. The tactical disqualifier lies in its delivery platform. A Moab must be deployed from a large, slow-moving cargo aircraft. Dispatching a non-stealthy transport deep into hostile Iranian airspace to hit Taleghan 2 would represent an unacceptable operational risk. That delivery aircraft would light up every remaining early warning radar in the region and become an immediate target. Yes, American electronic warfare and suppression operations have decimated Iran's integrated air defense network. Reports indicated that roughly 80% of those surface-to-air missile systems have been systematically neutralized. But that still leaves a scattered 20% of Iran's air defense capability active, more than enough to pose a lethal threat to a lumbering cargo plane hauling a Moab. That is a tactical gamble the Pentagon is simply unwilling to take. Therefore, the ordnance had to be the MOP, Bullets are delivered silently and lethally by the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. As for the GBU-57 MOP itself, it brings significantly more to the kinetic table than just raw mass and explosive yield. As detailed by Army Recognition, this specific munition was explicitly engineered for the singular tactical purpose of neutralizing ultra-hardened and deeply buried targets. Interestingly, its development was heavily accelerated following post-2003 combat assessments, indicating the Pentagon identified distinct operational limitations with the MOAB and mandated the creation of a specialized deep penetration tool. The MOP was the ultimate answer. This weapon relies on sheer kinetic energy to punch through reinforced targets, utilizing a smart, what's a delayed action fuse that only initiates the internal detonation sequence after the weapon has successfully breached the target's defensive shielding. A specialized ultra-hardened casing, combined with the extreme terminal velocity of the weapon, guarantees the MOP remains structurally intact while it drills through earth and concrete. While its internal explosive payload is not as massive as the 18,700 pounds of explosive fury packed into the MOAB, the MOP's roughly 5,300 pound warhead still generates a catastrophic blast wave, particularly when that explosive energy is physically contained within the narrow subterranean confines the weapon was designed to breach. When you combine that explosive yield with the capability to penetrate up to 200 feet of reinforced earth and concrete, you get a bunker buster that was physically impossible for Tehran's engineers to defend against. This capability perfectly complements the joint US and Israeli tactical strategy. Utilize American heavy bombers to shatter the subterranean vaults, then authorize follow-on strikes to systematically dismantle the above-ground support infrastructure. It is important to note from an intelligence standpoint that while this assessment is highly educated, it remains primarily based on orbital imagery analysis. As of mid-March, the Pentagon has maintained strict operational security, neither confirming nor denying the specific deployment of MOPs against the Taleghan 2 complex. When media outlets attempted to verify the strike parameters by contacting US Central Command directly, CENTCOM rigidly refused to comment on ongoing kinetic operations. However, every visual data point aligns perfectly with MOP deployment signatures, and we have confirmed reports that the US Air Force has been operating B-2 Spirit stealth bombers inside Iranian airspace, the only strategic platform currently certified to deploy these massive penetrators. The tactical math is undeniable, even if Washington is withholding the official press release for now. Analyzing the strike patterns, there are distinct tactical deviations between the MOP deployments executed during Operation Epic Fury and those seen during Operation Midnight Hammer back in 2025. The primary difference lies in the terminal approach. At Taleghan 2, the impact craters are grouped directly over the facility's hardened roof, indicating a brute force direct penetration attack. Conversely, during the 2025 strikes on Fordo, American targeting specialists exploited existing ventilation shafts, dropping the MOPs directly down those vulnerable structural arteries to ensure maximum depth penetration before detonation. This specific tactic was confirmed by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in June 2025, when he noted that Tehran had frantically attempted to cover the shafts with concrete to try to prevent an attack. Obviously, those desperate countermeasures failed, but this discrepancy raises critical questions regarding why the Air Force opted for a direct roof strike for this latest operation. The most straightforward tactical answer is that the Taleghan 2 complex may have utilized a completely different ventilation architecture than the bunkers targeted during Operation Midnight Hammer, meaning those specific vulnerabilities simply were not present for targeting pods to lock onto. Alternatively, the answer might lie in the defensive engineering Tehran attempted to implement. While burying a bunker beneath thousands of tons of compacted soil and concrete looks formidable, it must be exceptionally deep to defeat a munition engineered specifically to drill through 200 feet of solid rock and steel. Based on the before and after satellite intelligence of Taleghan 2, the most likely scenario is that American targeting officers hit the roof directly for one simple reason: because they possess the sheer kinetic capability to do so. The facility's shielding was mathematically insufficient to stop the GBU-57. While the subterranean devastation was absolute, Tehran was likely unprepared for the immediate, coordinated follow-on strikes. With the primary underground bunker neutralized, one might argue the primary tactical objective was achieved. Whatever illicit activities were occurring in the dark were permanently halted. However, Washington and Jerusalem intended to shift the Taleghan 2 site from being merely inoperable to being totally and completely effectively erased from the map. The Israeli Air Force took point on the secondary phase. Reports indicate that the Israel Defense Forces officially claimed responsibility for striking the Taleghan 2 complex overnight on March 11th. Since the IDF does not possess the 30,000-pound MOP, we can conclusively rule out their involvement in the primary subterranean breach. However, what the Israeli Air Force does possess are highly capable 2,000-pound bunker-busting munitions, which were likely utilized to systematically level the remaining complex. The roof had already been cracked wide open by the Americans. All the Israeli fighter squadrons had to do was fly through the sanitized airspace and drop their ordnance into the ruins. Further intelligence highlights additional kinetic damage inflicted on peripheral structures surrounding Taleghan too. It has been verified that fire control and instrumentation facilities located just west of the adjacent Taleghan, one complex, had also been leveled. This specific destruction was not collateral damage from the American MOPs. These structures were situated too far outside the primary concussive blast radius. And this strongly indicates that Israeli strike packages methodically picked off the external support architecture with precision-guided munitions long after the primary Taleghan 2 bunker was consumed in a subterranean firestorm. The Iranian regime is currently reeling. Nearly a year of intensive, highly expensive defensive engineering designed exclusively to shield Taleghan 2 proved to be a spectacular failure. The B-2 Spirit and its payload demonstrated that American strategic air power is so overwhelmingly dominant that it can effortlessly punch through any physical barrier Tehran attempts to construct. The mullahs must be frantically wondering what target is next on the kill list. The Pentagon undoubtedly has a robust target deck already finalized. But Taleghan 2 is far from the only strategic site where Tehran has invested massive resources into subterranean fortification. According to Reuters, identical defensive engineering patterns have been identified at several of Iran's most critical military complexes, including Parchin and Isfahan. Tunnels were being buried deeper, and facility access points were heavily reinforced leading up to mid-February as the IRGC braced for the American kinetic response. High-resolution satellite intelligence has fully documented all of this desperate fortification work. Ultimately, all this engineering has accomplished is effectively painting massive tactical bullseyes directly over Iran's remaining nuclear and ballistic missile infrastructure. If Tehran wants to calculate where the next wave of MOPs will impact, they only need to look at where they just poured their freshest concrete. Iranian leadership might be clinging to the desperate hope that the US Air Force will quickly exhaust its stockpile of MOPs, or that the B-2 bomber fleet will be grounded. Both hopes are entirely misplaced. While the Pentagon maintains strict operational secrecy regarding its exact inventory of heavy penetrators, reports confirm that the Defense Department aggressively moved to replenish its MOP stockpiles well ahead of Operation Epic Fury. The Pentagon finalized a massive procurement contract with Boeing valued at over $100 million specifically to replace the munitions expended during previous operations. Financial Times estimates place the unit cost of a GBU-57 at approximately $4 million. Therefore, that recent contract procures at least 25 brand new MOPs, entirely separate from the deep reserves the Air Force already maintains. American forces have deployed approximately 14 so far. With fresh munitions actively rolling off the assembly line, Global Strike Command remains fully equipped to continue shattering hardened Iranian targets indefinitely. The regime cannot expect the B-2 fleet to leave the theater either. Strategic tracking confirms that B-2 Spirits were redeploying to forward operating bases in the United Kingdom as early as March 4th, following London's critical decision to reverse a previous restriction on staging stealth bombers for these specific strikes. In tactical terms, this means the B-2 fleet is being actively maintained, rearmed, and refueled at forward locations far too close to Iranian airspace for the regime's comfort. Global Strike Command can order these stealth platforms back into the Iranian theater at a moment's notice, and the IRGC's degraded radar networks will not even detect them until the ordnance is already tearing through their bunker roofs. That is the entire defining purpose of a low observable strategic bomber. US President Donald Trump has explicitly warned that a big wave is coming following the forward deployment of the B-2S to Europe. That wave will highly likely consist of a relentless series of heavy stealth strikes targeting the deeply buried command and control nodes the regime hoped would ensure their survival. What tactical recourse does Tehran have? Practically none. On this, operational paralysis explains why the regime has doubled down on projecting empty rhetoric and issuing absurd diplomatic demands in a desperate bid to halt Operation Epic Fury. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps attempts to project defiance, broadcasting violent threats and launching asymmetric, low-level drone and missile attacks against US and allied assets. In reality, these are nothing more than weak, desperate jabs failing to counter the devastating kinetic haymakers being continuously delivered by American air power. Meanwhile, Iran's political elite are desperately searching for a diplomatic off-ramp, though they operate under the dangerous delusion that they still possess strategic leverage. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian recently utilized X to outline Tehran's official demands for a ceasefire. He declared that the only path to ending the conflict involves the recognition of Iran's so-called legitimate rights, the payment of massive war reparations, and ironclad international guarantees against future military action. These are the arrogant demands of a nation that believes it is winning the war. The reality on the ground tells a completely different story. 3 massive, smoking craters in the roof of Taleghan to prove conclusively that Tehran is losing, and losing badly. The United States arsenal possesses plenty more where those came from if the regime insists on stubbornly testing the sheer, overwhelming destructive capacity of American strategic air power. While Tehran attempts to fearmonger that continuous American strikes will trigger World War III, that escalation seems highly improbable. However, there are several actual flashpoints that could ignite a global conflict in 2026. Sound off in the comments below. Do you think the B-2s are gearing up for another run? Smash that like button, subscribe to Titan Mechanics, and share this intelligence with your squad. We'll see you on the next one.